One of the things that AI does is it exposes mistakes that maybe somebody made in the past. You built this system for a specific purpose, but it contains critical data. The quality is not as good.
You want to leverage AI, that's great, but your data is nowhere near ready to be able to truly leverage the power of AI.
In order for AI to be effective, you need...
Today on the podcast, we'll be speaking to Tom Leddy, Technical Architect Director at Saleforce. We'll be speaking to Tom today about roadmaps and the importance of developing roadmaps holistically so that you can really drive ROI in the future. We'll be talking about collecting clean data in such a way that AI can truly leverage it to drive a better digital experience. And we'll be talking about collecting the best data. What really matters to drive the personal experience that people respond to, that they expect, and that are going to drive conversions. We're excited to talk to Tom today. Let's get started. Tom, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm happy to have you on and very happy to have your perspective on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, as you know, we're here really to talk about that digital post-click experience, that space where customers spend so much of their time making their decision, and the challenge organizations have of the kind of experience they want to deliver, the expectation that people have around that experience, and ultimately their ability to actually deliver it, and all those things that kind of go in between. And we know you live in that space, right? You live in that gap between the kind of experience they want to deliver and where they are today, and how they kind of move those 25 steps to end up getting to that place.
Yeah.
So as you deal with the multitude of organizations that you've dealt with, what are those common data management collection issues that you see just occurring again and again?
So there's a few of them really. And I think the two biggest ones that come to mind are a lot of organizations have data that's really siloed. So they're, when you think about all of the different data that you want to bring together to create like that really good digital experience, well, it's hard to do that if it's in like 15 different systems that you've been collecting for, multiple years. And then the other problem is the data, it usually isn't the level of quality that you really need to be able to kind of, create maybe a unified profile of somebody and really understand, get that full view of what they're doing with your organization, how they're interacting, so that you can give them a really personalized experience you want to be able to give them.
I know a problem that we run into a lot when we're trying to kind of deal with these kind of data collection issues to get that data to be able to use it to personalize the experience is that not only are there several systems, but several of them tend to be legacy proprietary systems, right? So systems that have just been there sometimes literally since the 80s, right? I mean, some of those systems were really built and stood up in the 80s, and these end up being the backbone of some of these organizations where they're running core systems of record on these proprietary systems. How do you help them to architect it in such a way that they can get this key data from those systems to be able to say, okay, now we can use it to deliver the kind of digital experience that people expect now in 2025?
Sure. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned systems from the 80s. So you would be surprised at the number of organizations I've come across that are still using like mainframes and AS400s. And like you said, that's their system of record for maybe not for everything anymore, because over the years, companies they'll implement newer systems, but there's always that one piece of functionality that they can't get rid of the old system just yet, and it's kind of hanging around. But that one piece of functionality is also associated with some critical data that they need about their customers. And this used to be a lot more difficult, if I'm going to be honest with you. So 10 years ago, just the integration tools were not available to be able to extract data from systems like that. There were a lot of, special kind of layers that you needed to put on top of them. And I would say that's still the case, but those layers are getting a little bit easier. Like it's, there are tools like robotic process automation and different types of tools that you can kind of scrape data from mainframes and some of those old green screen systems. It's not ideal, but I think the bigger thing is, though, it's not even necessarily the tools, and it's more of the approach and sitting down and really thinking through your data, coming up with a strategy for how you want to be able to use your data, where it is, identifying what all those sources are, And a lot of times what'll end up happening is that those types of discussions will actually spur other projects where some, people say, okay, you know what? I didn't realize that, I knew we still had this old system that was around. I knew we were using it for a couple of things. I didn't realize how important this data was. And we need to think about migrating it. And then we'll start to maybe plan out and put together a roadmap to do something like that.
That makes me think of something. A challenge that I'm sure you run into often is you've got the business, perhaps the marketing team that's asking for that experience, right? This is what they want to deliver. This is what they want to execute. Then they turn around, they go to the technical teams, they go to IT, they go to the engineers and say, well, this is what we want. And oftentimes there's a disconnect there, right? The business isn't able to effectively articulate to the engineering and technical team exactly what they want, leaving the engineering and technical team at a disadvantage because they're not getting exactly what it is. And a lot of times in an organization, that just leads down a deep, dark path because now what ends up happening is the engineering team comes back and says, all right, this is what we think you want. The business team, the marketing team says, nope, that's not all it. They think, okay, we wasted several months and tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on this and it was all junk, right? And then they call someone like you in and say, all right, Tom, fix this. So how do you end up kind of mitigating between those two kind of extremes, right? How do you end up kind of being the diplomat, so to speak, and making sure that the business requirements are being properly translated into the technical specs?
Some of those can be difficult conversations too, especially like you said, when you've got that scenario of, business users go and they'll give requirements to IT. IT will go build something and then they'll come back and then, the business will say this isn't what you want. And if that's been going on for a long time leading up to when I come in, a lot of times there's a lot of, there can even be animosity between the two sides. And it's gentle conversations for, but also I think, the one thing that I do have noticed in the past is when there are projects like that, where it's the business giving IT a specific set of requirements, IT going and trying to build something, the scope of what they're trying to do is really narrow, where they don't really get like a big picture view. So I think sometimes just coming in and helping to take a step back and let's look at your entire architecture across your enterprise. Let's figure out what you're trying to do and what's going to be most beneficial for your organization too. Because another thing we find a lot of times is business users they know what they know, and there's a lot of people like to kind of follow the same processes because it's what they're used to. And sometimes it's coming in and saying, look, I've worked with other organizations in your same industry or just similar organizations to yours. Here's the way they would approach this problem, and we all almost go back to square one, and look at your foundation, look at your architecture. Let's figure it out, and then let's put together a roadmap that's realistic too. You're probably not going to get everything on day one, but what can we do that's going to have enough impact that it's going to be worth your time? And then what can we do? What can we do to build on that from there?
You mentioned the word roadmap. How important do you find it is to help them understand that they need to have a roadmap for success? That hey, there's things you want to do, but before we can get to where you want, which is step 18, there's 17 other things that need to happen first, and those 17 things affect not just this one system you're thinking about, but these 4 other systems as well, right? How do you help them appreciate the value of that roadmap to say there are dependencies here, and we need to do this in a certain order to have this be successful?
A lot of it is trying to explain things in non-technical terms, right? And kind of understanding just the telling somebody like, hey, we need to build this specific interface to this system or whatever. Like, engineers will definitely appreciate that. Business users, like to your point, they just want to know where their data is, and they want to be able to do something that they saw at like a cool demo at a trade show or something like that. And what takes some time to step back is to say, look, it's like I said, it's taking this step back and saying, look, we can't do everything that you're wanting to do is not going to happen on day one. Here's why. Your landscape is complicated. Usually it's it's become complicated over a period of several years. But we will, we can work towards it, and let's agree. The hardest part is really getting that buy-in on like what is a minimum viable product. Um, and I think one of the other things that helps too is some of the newer methodologies where things are like a little bit more agile. So thinking through, if you're used to doing a project 10 years ago where, the kind of the way we even described it earlier, the business goes and gives a bunch of requirements. IT goes and spends 6 months building something. The business really never hears from them again until it's time to go and test their system. And then all of a sudden IT comes back and they're like, here's what we built for you. And the business is like, that's not what we asked for. Um, Having business stakeholders involved in every step of the way and, of the entire development process, and getting feedback as things go along and being able to course correct is something else that helps. And business users that aren't really used to that, I think in the beginning there's a little bit of a learning curve because you're used to kind of, like I said, here's my requirements, go build this. I'll see you later. It does take more of your time to be involved in like regular meetings where you're giving constant feedback, but the results end up being a lot better. And I think once people get used to that approach, they really appreciate it a lot more, and then they can start to appreciate the value of things like roadmaps.
I 100% agree. It can't be black box to them, right? I mean, I think historically, especially if you're of a certain generation, maybe you're kind of used to that. Um, but I don't think that's the way it can be today, right? I mean, uh, the business person, the marketer needs to have some technical understanding, right, of what's going on, of what's happening, of how this is developing, because the world of technical and business historically has been very, very separate, right? It's been very siloed. But in the modern day, in the digital age, those things are completely interwoven. And to try to operate from a place where they're kept separate ends up being counterproductive, right? It doesn't get you anywhere. So you've got to be invested, you've got to be involved, you got to understand what's happening, and you really need to take the business and kind of take them by the hand and walk them down that path and help them understand what's happening, educating them along the way, so that they can see the vision, understand the complexity involved in this, and have an appreciation for it, right? Just an appreciation for the technical team is doing.
I agree, and I think one of the other things too is the evolution of the systems themselves that's kind of helping that. I mean, the reality is it would have been nice if all the way from day one when we first started seeing, enterprise systems being used in businesses that business users would have been deeply involved with the development and everything. But those systems, historically were so difficult to develop on, and it just wouldn't have been there wouldn't have been enough ROI for a business user's time to be digging in and giving feedback and down. And if you look at the tools that are available today, there are things that business users can go in and configure on their own, but they need to have that mindset. Like it's kind of like what you were saying. In order to be able to do a good job of this, you need to think about what your data looks like, where it is, what are you trying to accomplish, and everything, and then kind of marry that to, and here's how the system works, and then it's a little bit easier to partner with IT. Now, I think one of the challenges is that there's still a lot of old mindsets where people are kind of used to the way that things used to work, and just assume that that's how they're always going to work. So
I'm sure in dealing with that and navigating that, one of the things that comes up a lot, particularly on the business side, is like the desire to leverage AI and to say, how are we going to use AI to help improve this experience, to help drive additional transactions, to help drive customer retention, all those key metrics that the business side is looking for. But as you mentioned, data collection and data management, if it wasn't critical before, right, it becomes even more critical when it comes to AI, because that intelligence is only as good as the knowledge it's fed, which is the data that you have. Is that a conversation you have to have with people to help them understand that, hey, you want to leverage AI, that's great, but your data is nowhere near ready to be able to truly leverage the power of AI? How do you have that conversation?
yeah, 100%. And in fact, one of the things that AI kind of does is it exposes mistakes that maybe somebody made in the past where You built this system for a specific purpose and now it's siloed off from the other systems, but it contains critical data. All the things that we were talking about, the quality is not as good. And in order for AI to be effective, and regardless of what type of AI, there's generative AI, there's predictive AI, but in order for any of those things to be effective, you need clean, consistent data. And having those conversations, those can be tough conversations because well, this looks easy when I see, when I saw the commercial about it or whatever, I watched a YouTube video that showed me how to build this thing in like 20 minutes. And it's like, yeah, building, the front end piece of it isn't as difficult as thinking about all the different pieces that need to get stitched together on the back end. And those are some conversations that need to happen. And I think where we're at with AI right now is we're still kind of really early, even though it seems like everybody's using it. At the end of the day, we're still really early. So I think the best approach to it that is a phased approach. Like, can we build everything out that's gonna have all the information about all of your customers and make automated decisions. Well, if your data isn't consistent and in high quality on the back end, probably not. There's probably some smaller things we can do up front, like building a nice chatbot that'll read use your website and to answer questions and all that. And then as your users are getting used to that, then we can start working on some of the other things in the background. And then that comes back to, let's put together a roadmap and let's figure out what it's going to take to get from where you are today to where you can be.
What is a typical starting point that an organization will be content with? Because as you mentioned, this theme has come up a lot where, hey, look, there's a roadmap here. This needs to be a phased approach. We need to figure out what the MVP is here, the minimal viable product. You're not going to get to where you want to get to tomorrow, but we can get you at least here, kind of one step along the way. And then, okay, now we're ready for phase two. Now we'll get you here. And incrementally, we'll help you kind of mature, right? And help that maturity curve start to go up when it comes to that experience. But it needs to start somewhere. We need to crawl, then we need to walk, right? Then we need to run and hopefully fly. What do you see organizations usually use as a good kind of entryway or starting point into a more modern digital experience?
Well, if we're talking about AI, probably one of the first things that that you can use is whatever publicly available information that you have now. We can kind of that fairly straightforward. We can consolidate that if it's like knowledge articles or like something on an organization's public website. We can put those things together. Build something that like utilizes that information. Still, fairly generic experience, but that's the starting point. And then while we're starting to build that out, we can have somebody else maybe mapping your data sources to get you to the next level, which the next level is maybe we're able to utilize all the data that's in your CRM system and your ERP system or something. And then let's start pulling in some of those other older legacy systems that you have and figure out what it's going to take to get those together. Or, the other question is, do you even want to pull that data in, or do you want to start to figure out how to migrate it, or where do we need to put it to be the most effective too?
What that makes me think about is a lot of the things that we talk about, right, is when we talk about that experience, we say, focus on usability first. Like, let's make this as easy as possible for the person. And then once you've done that, once you've kind of removed the friction, then we kind of bring in these other elements to help build value, to help persuade. And that's really what you're talking about from a technical perspective, is saying, you have this website that has all this content and valuable information. Oftentimes the challenge is people just can't find it. So let's leverage a tool like AI to be able to essentially scrape the website and help kind of bring that information and surface it, right? Make it more shallow so people can more readily access what's already there, the content that's already been put together. That's kind of the friction, right? You're orienting people to where they are. Then the next step is, okay, now let's look at the backend systems. Let's begin to talk to the CRM system. Let's integrate with the CDP, whatever that happens to be, to perhaps bring more personal information about this person's purchase history or their preferences or wherever the case might be, or even looking at people who look like them, right? Lookalikes for recommendations. And now let's surface that information as phase two and begin to kind of nudge and persuade them in the right way to perhaps look at things like, again, not only improving conversion, but increasing average order value, right? Increasing retention, looking at frequency, all those kinds of deeper metrics that are going to have a longer term impact on lifetime value. Is that the way you try to position it to business users so they can understand the value of what's happening?
Yeah, it is. And then some of those KPIs that you just mentioned too, like, improving conversion for is a good example is when you start to present things to the business and you can tie them to specific KPIs and show them that there is going to be ROI on doing this. And not only that, but there's going to be even more ROI if we do it the right way. That's what we can kind of use as as a driving point for those discussions of let's not try to do something sloppy and throw everything together right now. Let's take a measured approach and be intentional about what it is that we're building and make sure that you are going to have the benefits from it that you're expecting to.
We've talked about it almost from a more passive perspective of this is the kind of experience people are having when they come to the website, right? And what you're kind of surfacing there. But then taking that to the next level, you want to be more proactive about it and you want to kind of trigger communications based on this, right? And you want to push an email or an SMS message that's timely, that has valuable content information. What are the challenges with that? With kind of taking it to the next step and saying, okay, well, how do we push messaging to these people?
Number one, making sure that we have enough information to identify who somebody is. So there's certain emails that we could, even before AI, I mean, you could send out an abandoned cart email, for example, if somebody starts shopping on a store and then they close their browser window, as long as they were logged in, right? Now there are better ways to capture information from people, even if they're not necessarily logged in, but if they're browsing your website, you can actually look and see what is this person interested in. What are they shopping for? What did they actually buy? What did they not buy? And collecting all that information in a way that you can send it so that you can send them, something that is going to feel like a personalized experience. That's going to feel like it's, a piece of content that was created specifically for them without also feeling like creepy, like you're, like spying on them. Because the reality is you want to make sure that you're creating a good experience for them. And, and so part of it is just knowing what information that you want to collect and then how to tie it all together and make sure that it's all associated with the right individuals.
So as you do that, do you find that you have to spend time really helping to educate? Because, it looks very easy when people get an email from Amazon or from whatever retailer, right, an abandoned cart. How much time do you have to spend educating and saying, well, the first thing we have to do on the back end is we need to do something you just mentioned, like we need to know who this person is. Like we're not going to magically know who this person is just because they came to your website, right? There needs to be some technical mechanism in place that identifies this person, whether there's a step in the process where they're first entering their email and then we're capturing it, or we're able to stitch that together because maybe we understand this user is the same one who came from their mobile phone yesterday and we knew who that was, right? How much of that is an education process for you of helping them understand, hey, there's a lot of things behind the scenes that need to happen to get to this point to be able to deliver that communication?
It's actually a lot of education on that. And, the nice thing is there are tools available that will let you kind of stitch that information together today. So building it out technically is not as difficult as figuring out, like you said, what are the right touch points that are, what do we need to know to identify somebody and what do we need to collect about them? And then, defining all of those pieces so that you know what it is that you need to stitch together. And I would say that the education part is it's probably more than half of the process of getting the entire system built. So.
In that sense, do you think it's advantageous? And I'm going to preface this by saying, I know this is a bit of a loaded question, but do you feel like it's advantageous when people have a bit of an ecosystem from a technology standpoint where it's related systems, right? Kind of a similar technology base that they can leverage from? Or is it like, look, whether you have the same technology, whether you have, 7 different technologies that we're integrating, is 6 of one, half dozen of the other? Kind of what are the pros and cons of going in either of those directions?
The benefit of having like an integrated ecosystem, where everything is kind of built on the same technology is it probably is easier to combine the data from all these different systems because they're, ultimately on the same underlying platform. And there's certain technical things that will be a little bit easier to do. the benefit of having a bunch of different systems is, I think it probably depends on what those systems are. Because if we're talking about legacy systems, then it kind of goes back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, where it could be difficult to extract data from them. But the other, assuming they're, fairly modern systems, one of the benefits there is you could just say, okay, well, we have the best in breed for each of these systems, regardless of who the vendor is. Now we just need to figure out how to stitch all the data together. And with that, it comes down to, what do you have the right integration tool, or maybe you're taking all the data out of those and putting them into a data lake, which you're then using as your data source. But then that comes down to your strategy and your approach and how you want to handle that.
Now you touched on something that kind of got me thinking. So is that something that, like, when you're working with the groups that you're working with, your clients, is that something that you very much try to really emphasize with them, of saying, hey, look, whatever your ecosystem is, a big part of this is going to be saying, how do we capture and consolidate that data in a data warehouse, in a data lake, right? How do we keep that in a clean and structured way? Is that really something you kind of evangelize to the clients you work with?
Absolutely. Having a good solid data strategy and an integration strategy they're foundational to any good architecture that is that's building the base for all the flashy, cool things you want to be able to do on the front end. So yeah, absolutely.
Just to talk about that a little bit more for the sake of our listeners, like, what are the benefits of that? I mean, people hear, data warehouse, data lake, and they hear, data, and it's just like, okay, well, great, we can run reports, congratulations. Like, what are the real business benefits of having that kind of structured warehouse or data lake that people can leverage in the future?
You can get a full picture of your data and a full picture of like your customers or your constituents, or and you can make more informed decisions based on what you know about everybody. And then when you think about, when you come back to our discussions about AI, it's AI can make more informed decisions. And AI, if you're looking at some of the analytical pieces of AI, it's like you can start to spot patterns that maybe a person would never be able to do if they were looking in 5 different systems, across, one customer record. But there's different pieces of information here, over here, over here. AI can take all that together. If you look at it in a data, or pull it all into a data lake, and then put a layer of AI on top of it that can look and start finding patterns that just a human wouldn't be able to find within a reasonable amount of time. And then you can make decisions based on those findings.
And of course, you don't have to name any particular names, but even without using a particular name, can you think of a particular kind of use case where you've kind of been able to put that picture together, right? You've been able to structure the systems, get the integrations in place, get the data warehouse in place, and then layer on top of it and say, okay, this is the kind of experience we want to deliver. And then be able to say, now, look at the impact this is having on your business. Look at your metrics and how they're improving and changing. Can you kind of think about a client story that kind of tells that tale, so to speak, of they bought in. They got the fact that we can phase this out, we can roadmap this, we can implement this, and now we're going to see long-term benefit for the business.
I can tell you there's been a couple different clients that I've done that with, because it's kind of what I've been spending the last couple of years working on. And there's been, the biggest thing has always been, number one, helping to kind of shift that mindset of, this is the direction we need to go in. And then even if we start small and, do with just a couple systems or whatever, when you can start to see results and then want to bring more data in. But I can tell you, there have been a few clients that have been, I've worked with, that have been really happy with this approach, where it's, let's get all of your data, number one, into one place. Let's get it to a place where it can be analyzed easily. And then, like, you could build like a unified profile of all of your constituents. And then you can make decisions based on that. And then, it starts to open so many doors, right? You can proactively send communications out. So like you said, maybe it's an email, maybe it's an SMS text, or you can even adjust the content that's being displayed to them on your website. When they come to your website and they look, you can present products to them that that they would be most interested in. Or you could even have different content that's, or presenting some kind of an upcoming event that that they might be interested in registering for, or whatever. There's the possibilities are endless. And yeah, I can tell you, There's a few customers I've worked with that have done that really successfully, and there's some that are kind of on, they're at various stages of maturity, and we're working through some things. So yeah.
As you kind of gone through this process now, I'm sure several times, as you mentioned, customers all along kind of the spectrum, that kind of that maturity curve. Um, Kind of what are the surprises you've seen? Like, what are the things that have been like, oh, I've never seen that before, or that didn't turn out or go the way I thought it was. What are those kind of aha moments or surprises you've seen along the way?
I'll tell you, there's been there's been a few of those. They happen pretty regularly. A lot of times, it does have to do with the way that different systems are being used, and typically what we'll see is a customer implemented a system 8 years ago for like a specific purpose. A lot of other people realized that they could use that system for something else, or that the system was highly customizable, or whatever it was. Started going in and building a bunch of other stuff on top of that, and then the next thing you know, the result looks nothing like what that original system was even intended to be used for. And now we're trying to figure out how to make sense of what's being done in that system and what the data is. Usually that is, I would say, probably the biggest surprise, because you try building something on top of that, or you try utilizing the data that's in that system to build something, and it almost never will have the results you're expecting it to, because the system isn't being used in the first place the way that you were expecting it to be used. So
If you were gonna give advice, right, to our listeners, and most of our listeners will be kind of, business listeners, right, who are kind of sitting in those kind of leadership roles, especially on the marketing side. If you're going to give them advice in terms of what they need to know about the technical aspects of what they want to execute from an experience standpoint, kind of what's your number one, or maybe your top two tips that you would really give them to walk away?
I would say the first one is, regardless of how like flashy you want to get, or how what the cool things you want to build out, make sure that you're always keeping like trust and security in mind at the core, right? So the one thing you want your customers, your users, any stakeholders you have that that might have access to your system at any point in the process, you want to make sure that they know that their information is secure and being protected. And then on top of that, is the other thing is just think about your designs like intentionally, right? So we talked about roadmaps a bunch of times throughout the course of this conversation, and roadmaps are one thing. There's also just in like general like change management, and planning for doing all that long-term planning, setting design standards to make sure that things are maintainable in the future. And think about that, and take those two things in mind as you are having those discussions with your IT team, and and that'll hopefully help you form a good partnership, because your engineers will be able to tell you what's possible from a technical perspective. And then if you're thinking about things, like I said, a little bit more intentionally, and thinking about short term and long term, it'll help with some of those conversations of, okay, I understand this is what's possible today. What's going to be possible in 6 months if we were to do XYZ in the meantime? And ultimately, you can kind of come to an agreement of what'll be possible to roll out when.
Tom, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your time, and definitely appreciate your expertise.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.